The hardest part of walking away isn't the steps you take. It's the weight you carry in your mind, the doubts, the what-ifs. The fear that maybe you gave up too soon, or that he'll become the man you always wished he could be. Those thoughts are what keep people stuck, even long after they've physically left. But regret is just your brain clinging to a fantasy. The truth is, if he was truly the right one, you wouldn't have had to fight so hard to be seen, valued, or loved. Walking away without regret is about realizing that leaving wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. It's not about erasing the past, but about choosing a future that no longer carries the weight of what broke you. When you walk away like he never existed, you're not running from something, you're stepping into your freedom. Your mind is sneaky after a breakup. It doesn't show you the truth. It shows you the edited version, the highlight reel, the moments that made you feel special, wanted, adored. It leaves out the parts that made you cry, the nights you felt invisible, the times you lowered your standards just to keep the peace. And that's the trap. When you romanticize what broke you, you set yourself up to long for something that never really existed in the way you remember it. That's why so many people walk away only to circle back. They aren't going back to the reality of the relationship. They're going back to the illusion their mind created. The danger of romanticizing is that it tricks you into thinking you lost something rare, something irreplaceable. But the truth is, if it was truly rare, you wouldn't have had to question it so often. Love doesn't make you feel small, unworthy, or constantly anxious about whether you matter. Love doesn't drain you of energy, it fills you. When you find yourself looking back and only remembering the highs, stop and ask, if it was so good, why did I need to leave? That question pulls you back into reality. Because you didn't walk away from the best thing that ever happened to you. You walked away from the thing that wasn't working, no matter how much you wanted it to. Holds back her truth. Would you go back to a restaurant that served you a meal that made you sick and censors her own thoughts? Of course not. You'd remember the stomachache, not just the first bite. Yet in relationships, we do the opposite. We hold onto the appetizers and ignore the sickness. Walking away without regret means training yourself to see the whole picture, not just the glossy parts your brain wants to cling to. This isn't about denying the good moments. It's okay to acknowledge that there were times he made you laugh, times you felt close, times you believed it was real. But acknowledging those moments doesn't mean you ignore the pattern. Good moments can exist inside of toxic dynamics. But good moments don't erase consistent disappointment, neglect, or disrespect. If you only focus on the times he showed up, you'll forget the hundreds of times he didn't. Romanticizing blinds you to the imbalance, and it's that blindness that breeds regret. When you stop romanticizing, you give yourself the gift of honesty. You allow yourself to see that you didn't lose the one. You lost someone who couldn't meet you where you deserved to be met. And in that honesty, regret has no space to live, because regret feeds on the idea that you left behind perfection. Once you see clearly, you realize you didn't leave perfection. You left pain, inconsistency, and unmet needs. That clarity is freedom. One way to break the cycle of romanticizing is to remind yourself of the version of you that existed in that relationship. Who were you when you were with him? Were you confident, secure, thriving, or were you anxious, second, guessing, and often hurt? When you remember how you actually felt, not just what you occasionally experienced, you can see the truth more clearly. You can say, I don't miss him, I miss the moments I felt loved, and I can find those moments in someone who gives them to me consistently, not occasionally. The truth is, if you romanticize the past, you rob yourself of the future. You convince yourself that what broke you is worth going back to, and you delay the moment when you could meet someone who doesn't just give you flashes of love but a steady stream of it. Walking away like he never existed means refusing to give the illusion power over your reality. It's remembering that the highlight reel was never the full movie, and that the full movie is the reason you left. When you let go of the fantasy, you let go of regret. You stop longing for what never truly was, and you start creating space for what can be. And that is where real healing begins, not in clinging to memories, but in choosing to see them for what they really were. Leaving someone often feels like loss because we're conditioned to believe that relationships, no matter how unhealthy, are inherently better than being alone. That mindset tricks you into thinking that walking away means you've failed, or that you've given up on something worth saving. But the truth is, staying in a situation that chips away at your value is the real loss. Walking away isn't about weakness, it's about strength, and even more importantly, it's about self-respect. It's a decision to stop negotiating with your worth and to stop accepting less than what you deserve. Think of it like this: when you stay in a relationship that leaves you feeling unseen, undervalued, or constantly doubting yourself, you're slowly eroding your own foundation. Every time you tolerate behavior that hurts you, you send yourself a message: my needs don't matter as much as keeping this person in my life. Over time, that message shapes how you see yourself. You begin to accept crumbs as though they're meals, moments of attention as though they're real intimacy, and empty promises as though they're proof of love. That is the true loss, not the end of the relationship, but the loss of your self-respect while you're in it. Walking away flips that script. It's a declaration: I matter too much to keep lowering my bar. And when you make that decision, you reclaim something far more valuable than the relationship. You reclaim your dignity. That's why leaving should never be framed as losing. If you had stayed, you would have continued losing pieces of yourself. By leaving, you stopped the bleeding, you protected what was left, and opened the door to rebuild yourself stronger. That's not loss, that's victory. Of course, the heart doesn't always see it that way at first. It grieves the good memories, the moments of connection, the hopes you once had. But even in that grief, you have to remind yourself of the truth. Hope is not the same as reality. You weren't walking away from the potential of what it could be. You were walking away from the reality of what it was. And the reality is what matters, because that's what you were living with day to day. Respecting yourself means choosing truth over fantasy, reality over potential. It means acknowledging that while there were moments of love, the overall pattern was one that diminished you instead of elevating you. This perspective shift is crucial if you want to leave without regret, because if you frame leaving as losing someone I loved, you'll always carry the weight of sadness. But if you frame it as choosing myself when I was no longer being chosen, you walk away with pride. You understand that the relationship didn't end because you weren't enough. It ended because you finally realized you were worth too much to keep staying. Self-respect is the cornerstone of every healthy relationship you'll ever have, including the one with yourself. By walking away now, you're setting a standard not just for him, but for anyone who comes into your life in the future. You're saying, this is the line, this is how I deserve to be treated. And when you hold that standard, the people who can't meet it will fall away, but the ones who can will rise to it. That's how you build connections that don't just fill your time, but honor your soul. So when you find yourself doubting, when regret starts whispering in your ear, remind yourself of this: leaving was not the loss. Staying would have been. Leaving was the moment you chose to honor yourself, even when it was hard. And that choice, painful as it may be in the short term, is the one that ensures your long-term happiness. Because regret doesn't come from leaving. Regret comes from knowing you could have walked away and didn't. One of the biggest reasons people struggle to leave without regret is that they keep replaying the story in their head, trying to rewrite it. They think, if only I had done this differently, or maybe if I'd been more patient, more forgiving, more perfect, it would have worked. That cycle of self-blame traps you in a narrative where you're always the one at fault. and he becomes the missed opportunity you weren't strong enough to hold on to. But here's the truth. A relationship is never sustained by one person carrying all the weight. If you were the only one trying, adjusting, compromising, and making it work, then it wasn't a relationship. It was a rescue mission. And you were the rescuer, not the partner. When you cling to the story of what could have been, you're not remembering the relationship. You're remembering the fantasy version your heart created. But fantasies are dangerous because they give you something to mourn that never really existed. The man you loved in your imagination, the one who saw you, cherished you, and showed up for you consistently, that wasn't who he actually was. That was who you hoped he could become. Walking away without regret requires you to separate the fantasy from the reality and to admit that you fell in love with potential, not with consistency. The reality is, if someone truly valued you, you wouldn't have had to fight to be noticed. You wouldn't have been constantly trying to explain your worth or prove your importance. Love that is real doesn't put you in a position where you have to beg for scraps of attention or settle for crumbs of affection. And that's where the shift happens. You realize that what you lost wasn't a fairy tale love story. It was a cycle of highs and lows that kept you hooked but never truly fulfilled. When you see it for what it was, regret dissolves, because you understand you didn't walk away from the love of your life. You walked away from a loop that was keeping you stuck. Sometimes what we really grieve isn't the person, but the version of ourselves we were when we were hopeful about them. We grieve the nights when we believed the relationship could grow into something lasting, the mornings when their messages made us smile, the dreams we built in our heads of what life together might look like. That's normal, but grieving a dream isn't the same as regretting your decision, because once the dream collides with reality, you see clearly he didn't match the picture. He didn't rise to meet the vision you had, and the fact that you had to keep dreaming it proves that it wasn't real. This is why it's so important not to rewrite the story. Regret creeps in when you start editing the past, when you conveniently forget the sleepless nights, the unanswered texts, the excuses, the empty apologies. Regret lives in selective memory, but walking away like he never existed means refusing to edit. It means telling yourself the unfiltered story, the one where your needs weren't met, your heart wasn't protected, and your worth wasn't honored. It makes you proud because it reminds you why you left and why leaving was the best decision you could have made. It's also worth remembering that regret has a sneaky way of showing up only after time passes. Distance softens pain. But instead of letting distance trick you into forgetting why you left, let it give you perspective. Let it remind you that even with space, nothing changes the truth. You left because you had to. You left because staying would have been more painful than walking away. That is not something to regret, that is something to celebrate. When you stop rewriting the story and start accepting the reality, you free yourself from the grip of what if. You stop waiting for closure from him and give closure to yourself. And in that closure, regret has no room to grow. Because regret needs illusions to survive, but truth is its enemy. The moment you embrace the truth of your story, without edits, without excuses, you can finally walk away without ever looking back. One of the hardest parts of walking away is the silence that follows. You get so used to the noise of the relationship, the texts, the arguments, the small bursts of affection, even the disappointment, that when it's gone, the quiet feels unbearable. That silence is where regret often sneaks in, whispering, maybe you overreacted, maybe you should have stayed, maybe he'll change if you give him another chance. It's in that vulnerable space that many people go back, not because the relationship was good, but because the silence feels too heavy. But here's the truth, silence is not your enemy. Silence is the space where healing begins, and it's the bridge between who you were in that relationship and who you are becoming without it. Think about it this way: the human mind craves familiarity, even when what's familiar is painful. That's why people return to old relationships. They'd rather endure the same chaos they know than face the uncertainty of peace and solitude. But learning to sit with silence teaches you that peace, though strange at first, is far more valuable than chaos disguised as love. When you start to see the quiet not as emptiness but as clarity, you begin to realize that you're not missing him. You're just missing the distraction of having him around. And distractions, no matter how comforting, don't build a meaningful life. This is where the real work happens. In the silence, you start to hear your own voice again, the one that got drowned out when you were constantly worrying about his moods, his approval, his attention. That voice reminds you of who you were before the relationship and who you can become after it. It tells you what you actually want, what you truly need, and what you refuse to settle for again. Silence is where you remember that your worth was never tied to how much he valued you. It was always there, waiting for you to reclaim it. Regret has a way of amplifying when you don't know how to fill that space. If you spend your quiet moments scrolling through old conversations, replaying the good times, or stalking his life from a distance, you'll feed the illusion that you lost something irreplaceable. But if you use that silence to focus on yourself, to build habits that make you stronger, to pursue goals you neglected, to connect with friends who remind you of your value, you'll start to see the gift in walking away. Suddenly, the quiet isn't empty. It's full of opportunities, growth, and self-discovery. You might think that staying busy is the answer, but busyness without reflection just delays healing. The silence isn't about keeping yourself distracted. It's about allowing yourself to feel, to process, to confront the truth of what you experienced. It's about saying, yes, I'm lonely sometimes, but I'd rather be lonely for a moment than in a relationship that made me feel alone every day. That kind of honesty transforms regret into gratitude. Gratitude that you had the courage to leave. Gratitude that you have a chance to rebuild. Gratitude that you no longer have to compromise your peace just to have someone by your side. Over time, silence becomes something you treasure instead of fear. It becomes the evidence that you are no longer in chaos, no longer waiting for someone to validate you, no longer tethered to a cycle of highs and lows. Silence is proof that you are free, and when you start to see freedom as more valuable than familiarity, regret disappears. Because you realize that what you gained by leaving is far greater than what you left behind. So when the quiet moments feel heavy, remind yourself that they are temporary. You're not walking away into a void, you're walking away into a new chapter that hasn't been written yet. The silence is just the blank page, and what you fill it with is entirely up to you. That isn't something to regret, it's something to embrace with everything you have. Regret often lingers because we tie our identity to the role we played in someone else's story. You might look back and think, I was his support, his safe place, the one who believed in him. Who am I now that I'm not that person to him anymore? That thought makes it feel like walking away means erasing not just him but a part of yourself. But the truth is, your identity is not defined by who you were to him. It's defined by who you choose to be for yourself. Walking away without regret means reclaiming that identity, detaching it from his narrative, and anchoring it firmly in your own. It's easy to fall into the trap of defining yourself through someone else's lens. Maybe he made you feel beautiful when he paid attention, smart when he listened, worthy when he praised you. But if your worth only felt real when it came through him, then it wasn't really worth. It was dependency. And dependency always creates regret, because when it ends, you feel like you've lost yourself. But the self you thought you lost was never gone. It was just hidden behind the shadows of seeking validation. Reclaiming your identity means pulling yourself out of those shadows and realizing that you don't need anyone else to tell you who you are. Think about what you gave up in that relationship, not just emotionally, but in terms of your dreams, your interests, your individuality. Maybe you stopped pursuing passions you loved because you were so focused on him. Maybe you silenced parts of your personality to keep the peace. Maybe you ignored your gut instincts because you were afraid of pushing him away. Each of those compromises chipped away at your sense of self, leaving you feeling smaller than you really are. Walking away gives you the chance to rebuild that self, to revive the parts of you that were dormant, and to reconnect with the person you always were beneath the weight of the relationship. This isn't just about rediscovering hobbies or spending time with friends again. It's about redefining your value system. Who are you when no one else is around? What do you stand for when there's no one to please or convince? Those answers are where your identity truly lives, and when you root yourself in them, regret has no power. Because regret only exists when you think you lost something, but when you reconnect with yourself, you realize you gained everything that matters back. You gained you. Another part of reclaiming identity is refusing to let the relationship define your story as a failure. People often carry regret because they see the ending as proof they weren't enough, but the end of something doesn't mean you weren't valuable, it means it wasn't aligned. You can respect the role you played in his life without letting it dictate your sense of worth. You can say, yes, I showed up, I gave love, I cared, and none of that was wasted because it showed me the depth of who I am. That perspective takes the sting out of regret because it transforms what you thought you lost into evidence of your strength. The most powerful shift comes when you realize that walking away doesn't erase your story, it simply shifts the spotlight back to you. You're no longer a supporting character in his life, you're the lead in your own. And when you step into that role fully, you stop obsessing over what you could have been for him and start focusing on what you can become for yourself. That's where true freedom lives. That's where regret dissolves. When you reclaim your identity, you no longer look back and wonder what might have been. You look forward and create what will be. You stop measuring your worth by how much someone else valued you and start measuring it by how fully you live as yourself. And in that shift, walking away stops being the end of something painful, it becomes the beginning of something extraordinary. There comes a point in moving on where you realize that regret only survives if you keep feeding it. It feeds on your thoughts, your energy, your time, every moment you spend rehashing the past, replaying conversations, or wondering what he's doing now. The more you give to those thoughts, the more you keep him alive in your present. Walking away like he never existed means cutting off that supply. It means choosing, day after day, to redirect your energy toward building a life so full, so vibrant, that there's no room left for him to haunt your mind. Energy is a currency, and you only have so much of it to spend each day. If you spend it checking his social media, stalking his updates, or secretly hoping he reaches out, you're bankrupting yourself emotionally. You're giving power to someone who no longer deserves access to your attention. But when you redirect that energy toward your career, your passions, your friendships, your growth, you suddenly realize how much potential was sitting dormant, waiting for you to claim it. That's when regret fades, because regret can't compete with the excitement of building something new. Think about it. Regret looks backward, but energy builds forward. You cannot simultaneously dwell in the past and create a future. Every time you say yes to your growth, you're saying no to your regret. It's not that you'll never have the occasional thought about him. You will. But the difference is, you won't water those thoughts anymore. You'll acknowledge them and then choose to invest your energy elsewhere. And that conscious choice, repeated over and over, is what turns healing into transformation. The most powerful thing about redirecting your energy is that it gives you back control. In the relationship, maybe you felt powerless, like you were always waiting on his decisions, his moods, his attention. But now you get to decide where your focus goes. That's the ultimate revenge, if you even want to call it that. Not hurting him, not proving anything, but living in such alignment with yourself that he becomes irrelevant. Karma doesn't just happen out there in the universe, it happens inside you. The moment you take your energy back, the scales balance, and you feel lighter, stronger, freer. This doesn't mean you won't have moments of temptation. There will be times you want to check in, times you want to reach out, times you wonder if he's thinking about you. But those are the exact moments where you need to ask yourself, do I want to give him another piece of my energy, or do I want to keep investing in the life I'm building? That one question can shift you back into power, because every time you resist the pull to go back, you strengthen your future self. And that future self is the one who lives without regret. Over time, the more you pour energy into yourself, the more distance you create from the past. And one day, you'll wake up and realize he doesn't occupy your thoughts anymore. Not because you forced yourself to forget, but because you replaced him with goals, with joy, with self-respect, with a life that excites you more than the memory of him ever did. That's how you walk away like he never existed. By making your present so rich and fulfilling that the past simply has no place. And here's the beautiful part. When you do that, you stop asking whether leaving was the right choice. You just know, because the life you're building speaks louder than any doubt ever could. You no longer live in the shadow of what you left behind. You live in the light of what you've created. And in that light, regret cannot survive. Walking away will never be easy. It will test your strength, your patience, and sometimes even your faith in yourself. But the truth is, regret is only real if you allow it to be. You don't have to regret leaving someone who couldn't love you the way you deserved. You only need to regret the time you stayed longer than you should have. And today, that regret ends, because now you're no longer the person who settles or waits or begs to be chosen. You are the person who chooses yourself. When you walk away like he never existed, it's not about denying the past. It's about refusing to let it define your future. It's about remembering that your life is not behind you. It's ahead of you. And every step you take forward without looking back is a step into a life where you don't just survive heartbreak, you thrive beyond it. So, if you're standing at that crossroads, wondering if leaving means losing, remember this. Leaving is not the loss. Leaving is the win. It's the moment you take your power back, the moment you honor your worth, the moment you make space for the love and life you truly deserve. And when you do, you'll look back not with regret, but with gratitude, grateful that you had the courage to walk away, and proud that you never once looked back.